Hey class, this is Mr. Cruz. I wanted to come on here and give you another video for today. This is for an assignment that you're going to be working on in my CCA. And I want to talk a little bit about Chapter 8, which is really, it's where we end the drama of Gatsby's story, okay? And one of the things to pay attention to, at least just before we get into the actual narrative, is to think about the past chapters as preparation for this one, but then also to think about past chapters and like in terms of how you saw Nick and how you saw Jay Gatsby, right? Because up until this point, Gatsby has not been very forthright about who he is. And of course, I've told you that Nick, at the end of chapter 7, was very put off by the actions of the day, in which they all kind of revealed their love for one another. Jay reveals his love for Daisy, but not only that, says that Daisy has really always loved Jay, but in turn, Daisy never really, she never really showcases the love that Jay thinks that she has for him. She doesn't reciprocate that love in the same kind of way. There's four things I want to get into in terms of just thematically before we get into chapter 8, which is that number one, when they actually engage in this like kind of affair together, before they tell Tom that. It does say that that Daisy blossomed for him, meaning Jay Gatsby, like a flower, which is to say, she opens herself up to him, right, for this affair. But the problem is that she does it in secret. She doesn't do it in this sort of like very open, I'm going to, leave Tom and we're going to be together forever. She doesn't do that. What she does instead is she wants to do it in secret, or she even hints at the possibility of running away, right? Never facing facts with the reality of her marriage and of the fact that Gatsby has built this life for her. And Nick sees this as a yearning that Gatsby has to return back to previous days. And Nick actually tells Jay, like, you can't return back to the past. You can't repeat the past, right? You can't get back the time that has been missed. You can only move forward. And we've talked about this in previous classes about time. You can't, you don't stop time, or you're never actually in the present. You're always moving forward towards something. And if you were to take the metaphor of, like, for example, a boat, assuming that you have no device or sail or anything that can take you in a different direction, if you're just on a wooden boat with nothing but the wooden boat, then it's the current takes you where it will, and that's the direction you're going, right? And you can look at time as a bit of a current, like it's a current that will take you forward, and you can't go back. So Gatsby has this idea in his head that he's going to be able to repeat the past, but in reality, he's not. He can't. There's not possibility. But one of the things that I think, if you've read up until now, it can be very difficult not to judge Gatsby on the basis of his, like, remember we talked a little bit about the idealization of his love and the way in which he idealizes Daisy. And, I've talked about how that idealization, sometimes can make people subhuman in some ways, like you can dehumanize them. And I still think that's true. However, up until chapter 8, it can be very easy to judge him on this basis and not humanize Gatsby in a way. Falling in love changes Gatsby in a way that that I think for many of us who have experienced what that's like, um, it changes everything about you, and it changes your perception of the world. It changes how you see things. It changes how you act, how you behave. Um, Everything about Gatsby changes. And yes, you could say, well, but he's fallen in love with the idea of Daisy. Yes, but do do we fall in love? And I'm talking about we. I'm talking about us readers. Do readers fall in love with the full person, or do we fall in love with an idea of a person? I would submit, at least initially, when you initially meet somebody and the idea of falling in love, right, which is so prevalent in culture, like think about a romantic comedy where they love at first sight and that kind of thing. You're always falling in love with an idea. You're never falling in love with the full person. You've never experienced that person, who they're like and what they're like in the morning and what happens when they're stressed and their desires. And guess what? Desires change. At 20, their desires are one thing, and then at 30, their desires are another thing. And you've never experienced them when they've had their children and when they're stressed out because they don't know what to do with their career. And there's a lot of different things that make up a person, and we think that, like, oh no, I love the full you, and when in reality we love partially, and that's very biblical, very biblical. It's one of the most biblical things that there is about this book, that we do love partially and with a kind of idealism, a sense in which we see in part, right? That's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. So because we see in part, we can only respond in part, right? We don't respond. It's like someone saying, like, I love God. I love you, God. Like, yes, that's a response, but it's one in part, because we're human beings who could never love with a kind of perfect love. Only God can, right? So in this sense, Gatsby loves with an imperfect love, and I'm sure he might probably admit that, but that doesn't change anything about what he feels and who he is and the reality of that love, of that feeling. It's important not to look at Gatsby with the same kind of with a kind of judgment that, like, for instance, I've heard a lot of 11th graders talk about, like, what a simp might look like, for instance, right? Like whether or not Gatsby is a simp. And perhaps. And unfortunately, the price you pay for a kind of dream that gives you a hope like that is exactly what that is, right? Being a simp. And by the way, this doesn't change. You're all simps. That's the story of being human, right? Which is to say that there are stories that we tell ourselves. That doesn't necessarily mean that those stories are untrue or anything like that, right? By the way, there are many stories that are fictional that are also very true, and I think the Great Gatsby is one of those stories. True, not in the sense that, like, whether it happened or something appears before me, but true in the sense that it tells me something about myself and humans in general that a textbook could never tell me, right? Like a fictional story, they tell us things about ourselves that we could never learn in a scientific experiment, or like just reading a textbook, or like memorizing a bunch of facts. It can't happen. Right? Stories give us the opportunity to see something that is much deeper, right, than just, what type of hair you have, or, your eye color, or whatever, right? Stories give us the ability to cling to something that that we can put our trust and our hope in much longer than if we were to say, my desire is to be the best, 2K player in the world. Well, that's cool, right? But that's not going to sustain me very long, right? Even the desire for money, right? The desire for money. It doesn't sustain you very long when the desire just becomes about money. Very often, when you probe deeper than this desire for money, there's always an underlying story, which is that perhaps the reason that you want that money is because you want the approval of your father, who said the only thing that was worth it in this world was to make something of yourself, to have money, to have security, right? Or maybe there's something deeper. A girl who will not give up her secure lifestyle in Long Island. And in chapter 8, it's Daisy who retreats from Gatsby after the war. Gatsby knows he's there at war, he comes back, he's penniless again. He has no money, no security, but he does have his love. That's not enough for Daisy. Daisy retreats into her comfortable life, into her very secure, rich house, and what does she do? She's around snobbery. She's around orchids and orchestras, and she wants her life shaped by something concrete, close at hand, something very material, not something abstract like love, for instance. It's very difficult to be shaped by that. It's hard work to be shaped by love because it means that it's filled with tension. That's what's so difficult about marriage, is that love is often, it shapes people, but it takes much longer, right? It takes much longer than you perceive, is what it is. What's immediately gratifying is to be shaped by the comforts of your life, right? Big house, a nice car, money, security, people who, are valets at your house who get you stuff. You go out to parties, you go and travel, you go to Europe, you go to wherever. It's nice, right? That's nice to be shaped by. And it takes the same amount of time to be shaped by it, by the way. Because the same people who are around you that are snobby, who are alone, who retreat into themselves, it shapes you into somebody who's snobby, someone who retreats into themselves, someone who is alone, right? But that's what Daisy wants, and she doesn't just want it when Gatsby comes back. She wants it now. And actually, Gatsby comes back too late. Daisy had met Tom already, and they were engaged to be married. And it's funny because the text actually says that she wants something close at hand. And I can't not think about the scene in which Gatsby is at the end of he's at the end of the dock in front of his house, and he sees the green light coming from Daisy's house. And Nick can see Gatsby at the end of the dock, and he reaches out towards the green light. Of course, not that he can necessarily touch it, but because this dream that he's held onto, this story that he's held onto so long, it's so close at hand, right? It's so close to Gatsby's grasp that it's like he almost has the full thing. He almost has everything he's ever wanted, which is Daisy, but also the other stuff, right? The security that he could give her that he never could. All the riches that she ever wanted, that beforehand he never could. And actually, in chapter 8, we see Nick begins to realize some things about Gatsby, which is that, number one, his house, he actually says in the very beginning of chapter 8 that it appeared that, more empty at this point. When they were looking around the house, it appeared so empty to him that he never noticed it, which is another way, at least from my perspective, of saying that Gatsby is so alone. And for the first time, Nick Carraway's seeing it. Because usually when Nick sees him, it's usually with other people. It's usually with, like with the big party, for instance, all these people there at his house. I mean, it's very hard to see someone like that as like, alone. But for the first time, Nick sees Jay as alone in that big house. That really is a house that Jay bought only for Daisy. And that's literally the reason he bought it. And Nick says that all this stuff that he does for Daisy, it would be easy for Gatsby to repel or to make someone feel uncomfortable or something like that, and make them feel kind of like, well, why are you doing that, like for this girl? But there was something of a kind of hope that Nick sees that he's never seen before. Instead of seeing someone try and fail and give up, Gatsby was the type of person who, even if he received very little, he would go forward. He would go forward with the very little that he had. You could see this a bit with like his financial situation, very penniless, but just going forward with the little that he has and just making something of himself. But of course, the thing that he makes of himself is by the time we get to chapter 8, is also a bit of a facade, isn't it? Because we already know that he's been engaging with some criminal activity and some salacious activity that he should not be engaging with. And Nick actually mentions the fact that the government could come in and blow away his entire fortune, just like that. So even the security that he could give Daisy was actually a mirage. It wasn't like Tom's. It was a dream. And that's a very important thing that we keep talking about, these dreams, right? Jay doesn't come from money, family money, just like Tom was. And that's why he's never really accepted into the society. And that's why also I think the distinction between West Egg and East Egg is very important. Remember, Tom lives in East Egg. Jay and Nick live in West Egg. And West Egg is young money. And East Egg is old money. And it's the type of difference in which the East Eggers see the West Eggers as living in a kind of mirage, right? Living in a kind of mirage. You could probably see like new money, by the way, as like a little bit like tech companies. I don't know if you guys follow the stock market or follow like businesses like let's say like Twitter, for example, right? Twitter somehow maintains itself and continues to stay alive because there's a lot of people who have poured like billions of dollars into this company. But it's a company that is always it's public, but it never actually makes any money. And then the other thing is that it's never, in the history of its existence, never once turned a profit in a year. So a company like that has grown so quickly and has been able to sustain itself via angel investors, which are outside investors who come in and pour money, or like advertisements that they do on social media. I'm sure you've seen them. These kinds of companies that just make money very quickly, and they become like the talk of the town. Like, oh, like did you see like so and so's tweets? Did you see the president's tweets? Blah blah blah. Right? That's new money, right? Why? Well, guess what? It can be thrown off just like this. Tomorrow, Twitter can announce it's closing. Literally. Right? As easy as any one of these stores can announce, or any one of these companies can announce on the stock market, yeah, they're closing. Or they're what is it? Now I'm trying to think of the phrasing. No, I can't think of it. Essentially, they're restructuring their debt. That's what it is. They're restructuring their debt, which is, of course, just a way of saying we're getting out of it. We're getting out of the situation, right? Of having to pay back the debt and all that stuff. Company like Disney, though, they're not closing tomorrow. They're not closing tomorrow. That's old money. It's been around for a long time. They're not closing tomorrow. They're not closing the next day. They're not closing in a month. They're not closing in a year. They got plenty of time, even if they made all the wrong decisions. That's old money. And that's the difference, is that who's going to stay around? Old money, not new money. Tom's going to stay around, not Jay. And I think that's kind of what's kind of at stake, what's happening. And of course, towards the end of that, of chapter 8, that's very much what we get from the story, despite the fact that Gatsby, at least from our perspective, is still going to be waiting for that call from Daisy from the previous night. He knows she's going to call and give them or give him exactly what he's always wanted, which is a life together. That doesn't happen though, right? Before that happens, Nick calls several times and then becomes aware that Myrtle Wilson's husband, Mr. Wilson, he has decided that Gatsby is the killer of his wife. Of course, remember that his wife, Myrtle Wilson, was also having an affair with Tom Buchanan. And so, if you remember, Tom and Jay switched cars in that scene, going away from Long Island, right? And then coming into the city and then coming back into Long Island. They switched cars, and so Jay was traveling in Tom's yellow car. And Myrtle Wilson thought that she saw Tom's car. So it looked like she was running away from her husband. At least that's what some reports said. But in reality, she saw Tom's car and tried to run towards the car to leave her husband, because she wanted to leave her husband and go with Tom. Of course, Tom didn't give her that kind of attention. But instead of getting to Tom, she gets run over by Daisy. Okay. Now the question is, did Daisy do it on purpose? Maybe she knew about this woman. Is there a chance in which that's the case? It's kind of left in the open a bit. But what we do know is Daisy runs over this woman, and her husband believes Gatsby was the one driving, not Daisy. And so he goes to his house, to Gatsby's house, and shoots him while he's swimming in the pool before they're about to drain the pool because the leaves are starting to fall. And so he shoots him in the pool. And then Mr. Wilson, it says it was after we started with Gatsby toward the house that the gardener saw Wilson's body a little way off in the grass, and the Holocaust was complete. So it appears that Mr. Wilson has killed himself as well. Now, where does this tale of Gatsby leave us? We're not in chapter 9 yet, where Nick Carraway really begins to process this. So I don't want to give anything away too much quite yet. But what I want to say, though, before I end off, is this sense in which Gatsby gives us, and at least he should give us, a sense of what hope would look like when it's misapplied, right? Because Gatsby should have been aware of the fact that he could not go into the past and he could not retrieve something that he thought existed. And also, he should have been more presently oriented. And what I mean by presently oriented is he should look at the situation between him and Tom and him and Daisy and see the fact that there is a distinction between them. And the dream, and I'm going to go into this in just a second, the dream that Gatsby held on to was a kind of American dream, that he could be Tom, that he could be someone like that Daisy needed. And here's the reality growing up penniless. He can't. It's not possible. Not unless you do something like Gatsby, which is to say that you get into organized crime and you make something of yourself which can be taken away from you in an instant. But he cannot be like Tom. And that's the reality of it. That's a dream, right? That in itself is a dream. That Gatsby could somehow, work his way up and pull himself by his bootstraps and become from a penniless person to a rich person. That was the dream in the 1920s. And we saw what happened at the end of the 1920s. The whole market crashed because people held on to that dream, right? And you make gambles and you do wild speculations, and the reality is that all of it was for nothing. Why? Well, the market crashed. So everybody lost everything. It vanished. That's the dream. All right? We'll pick this up next week. Thanks, guys.